All right, so a lot of people ask me to make a video on how to swear in Japanese, on Japanese swearing, so that's what this video is going to be. This video will be not safe for work. It will be 18 plus. I'm going to, by necessity, have to swear in Japanese and English. So get ready for all that. Also, though, as an educator, I feel a sense of responsibility in this video. I do not like books like Tadashi Fuck no Tsukaikata or Making Out in Japanese, which kind of approach vulgarity as like a haha funny thing. Here are some phrases, here's some stuff, here are some sentences. It's a schoolyard approach to swearing, which I find to be not only disrespectful to the importance of vulgarity as part of human communication, as part of linguistics, but also something which I think is disrespectful to learners in a way, as it does not properly contextualize these forms, which can be very dangerous, as they can get you into trouble. Obviously, being vulgar is something that a lot of people look down on, so if you use vulgarity in the right context, you'll probably be fine, but if you use it in the wrong context, you may suffer the consequences, whereas the authors of these books will not, because they are not there. So, I'm going to begin this. That is, before I talk to you about Japanese vulgarity, I'm going to make you sit through a lecture on vulgarity, swearing, etc., starting with just answering the basic thing that comes up time and time again, which is, does Japanese have vulgarity? And the answer is yes. That said, you may have heard that it does not, because there has been a large amount of, let's just start the swearing now, bullshit over the last decades where people have asserted that there is no swearing in Japanese. And this has come from all kinds of angles. I have found sources going to like 1950s, 1960s in English that assert this. Ian Fleming, the author of 007, James Bond, had a Japanese character assert this in You Only Live Twice. And I've seen Japanese academics publish things that have gone through peer review is not flawless clearly, that assert that Japanese doesn't have swearing, which is wrong. It may be a nice thing, it may be something that Japanese people want to believe about their language. Sometimes we see people lie about us and we think, oh, that's a good lie, I'll take that on. Like, people say my content sometimes is interesting and I'm happy to believe that lie. But it doesn't mean it's true. Like when you see a quote like this, where a translator is talking to Sega and the American person tells them to translate a swear word and the translator says, oh, we can't, that doesn't exist in Japanese. The first response should not be, wow, Japanese is such a polite language. Japanese people are so polite, they don't even have swear words. You should be, oh, okay, this translator is either bad or more likely does not want to be the person that says the translation of that in Japanese to the head of a major Japanese company, because there are going to be consequences for that translator maybe that will not be affected the head of the American company who is pissed off and has, power, authority, etc. The messenger does get shot sometimes, even if you're not supposed to do so. Some people, though, might say, okay, yes, Japanese has swearing, but it's not like it's not as intense as in English or my language. They're not real swear words, not real curse words. And it's also just a take that doesn't really hold water when we think about it. Now, if you mean curse words as in like actual curses or like blasphemy against God, yeah, okay, sure, no, but again, curse words do not mean that. We're not playing Dungeons and Dragons, we're just existing in 2025. And just because blasphemy is a source of curse words in some cultures, the fact that it doesn't exist in other cultures is not like a sign that theirs is weaker. Like, we can play this game with Japanese too. I can say that Japanese curse words are so much more powerful than curse words in European languages, because rather than dancing around it and calling someone like you a motherfucker or like you fucking prick or like you bastard or something like that, the swear words are sometimes concentrated on the word you itself, so it's more direct, it's more intense, because it doesn't need anything to modify, it doesn't work around it, it just hits you directly. Do you see how easy it is to just bullshit? It's very easy to make this stuff up. And one of the reasons people do this is the words that you know, the swear words that you know, any words you know actually, in the languages that you spent more time with are gonna have more impact for you. So swearing in other languages is just gonna not feel the same. I remember a really interesting quote that I found in some linguistics book, I'll pop it up here if I can find it, of somebody who is a native Italian speaker saying that even though they've spent decades using English, a 4-cheese pizza just does nothing to them, but seeing like the Italian word for it will make their mouth water. And like for myself, I've used Japanese for 2+ decades now, and intellectually, as somebody that studies Japanese language variation, I know all about how Japanese first-person pronouns work and what they imply. I made a whole video about it. But I still don't feel a vibe to them in the same way that Japanese people do. If I just say like atashi wa, I get that that's supposed to have feminine vibes or whatever, but I don't care. It doesn't really affect me that much. But I would never say that therefore atashi is like a meaningless pronoun. It's just that I didn't grow up in an environment where these kind of selections were really important. Just like you, if you're not a native Japanese speaker, someone raised in Japan, probably did not grow up in an environment where Japanese swearing was something that caused social consternation. Instead, it was your swear words. A Japanese person, however, who watches like American media and sees everyone just saying fuck, 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 fuck all the time, might think that actually this stuff's pretty casual when you can use it everywhere and it doesn't have much impact. And in some contexts, they may be right. Some other people, though, come at it and say that our swear words are more intense because you can't say some of ours on the TV, etc., like on midday news or whatever, but you'll see like some of these on Japanese programs for kids and things like that. And that, again, is understandable as an interpretation, but it's missing the point because offensiveness is not inherent to vulgarity. Your reaction to a word does not determine if it's vulgar. To explain, for instance, I think we could all agree that the word cunt is considered quite vulgar in English, one of the most. But in Australia, where I am, a fair number of Australians use this term affectionately when talking to each other in casual conversation. It's so well recognized that there are multiple studies about the Australian use of cunt in this kind of context. Now, when these Australians, which again is not like the prime minister or anything, you can't call your teacher that, but in these special contexts with these specific people, are using this word, they are not offended by it. But I think that if you sat down and surveyed them, is the word cunt vulgar? They would probably say, yeah, it is. I listen to a lot of death metal. I have people screaming at me in my ears that they're gonna fucking kill me all the time. I am not offended by that. But I do recognize in the abstract that these terms are vulgar. So the fact that like American media laws are a bit more puritanical than those in Japan, again, probably due to the cultural religious influence of Christianity, especially the specific types of Christianity, is not evidence that that English swear words are stronger than Japanese ones. It's evidence that American culture considers swearing a more taboo act than it is in Japan. Indeed, for instance, in my recent book, Peripheral Linguistic Brutality, out now via University of Hawaii Press for only like $30, you can't afford not to buy it. I interviewed a Japanese death metal musician and I was asking about whether or not Japanese people found his lyrics to be offensive or whatever, and we got talking about the infamous Cradle of Filth shirt, which has the C word on it. And I asked, like, does something similar exist in Japan, or what would happen if it existed? Like, would people get upset about it? And his response was, oh, probably not. They just think that that person is devaluing their own self-worth and nothing more. This is just one data point, but I think it's an interesting reflection that the idea that people go, oh, that's offensive, ban that shirt shouldn't exist, is not kind of the reaction. It's more like, oh, well, I'm not going to associate with that person. The vulgarity exists in either case, but the response is different. And even more importantly, though, if you are out there saying that Japanese people allow this stuff on TV, to some extent, I think you are right, but also they don't. There has been a history of Japanese people over the last decades, especially, rethinking, complaining about, writing letters to the editor, etc., about certain words, saying that they shouldn't be on TV, and changes in what is allowed on mainstream TV because of that. For instance, kotobagari, or word hunting, kind of like the Japanese version of when we used to talk about like PC language policing and stuff, was such a big phenomenon that it has its own labeled Wikipedia article. It has its own irastoya image, which if you know anything about it, that means it's a huge cultural phenomenon. If the irastoya person thinks that Japan needs clip art of something, it's a big deal. And during this time, a number of words, not all vulgarities, this included a number of terms that were discriminatory, etc., were stated that they should not be used on TV anymore. And recently, the show Futekisetsu ni mo Hodo ga Aru, which was very, very popular last year, had scenes flashing back to the 1980s, and there were trigger warnings at the beginning of these episodes stating, hey, the language use in this show, it might be shocking and offensive to people in 2025, but we're trying to reflect the kind of more rampant use of this sort of speech, the more common acceptability of this kind of speech that actually existed in the 1980s. So Japan has reflected on what kind of words are vulgar and where these words should be used, and made changes because of it. Even if you will see some forms that technically could be vulgar in Japanese daytime TV, and they wouldn't be seen in American. But that's true about British too. There's more swearing in British TV, Australian TV in the daytime than in American. Although again, this is changing over time. So the only kind of objective way to say that something is vulgar is just to kind of say that if you surveyed a large number of users of the language, they would refer to the term by that way. In Japanese, this would be via terms like kitanai, gehin, kuchi ga warui, warui kotoba zukai, things like that. And that again is different from offensiveness. And indeed, this will change over time. A lot of words that are vulgar now were not vulgar in the past. Shit and kuso, for instance, used to be just like the word that you used. Indeed, kuso appears in the Kojiki, which is a really ancient formal Japanese text produced by Japanese elites and an important part of Japanese history. But as time passes, and especially as people with money and power decide that they need special language to differentiate themselves from the lower classes, they develop new words, and the words that they replace those with eventually become vulgar. Remember that vulgar literally means commonplace, right? Common, the language of the common folk, which is bad, and the language of the rich and wealthy people who decide what language is good is good. What a fair system that is created that we all have to obey now. So my point here is that your language and your experience with language is a data point, but it is not a point of reference. And that's important to understand when talking about Japanese vulgarity. If you use some of the content I talk about in this video because you think it's funny, etc., or because you think that swearing is lighter in Japan, you will suffer consequences from that. And that's going to be on you. That's why I'm making this whole introduction. If you believe that certain forms in Japanese are just not as heavy, and therefore you use them to your boss, to your partner's parents when you're meeting them for the first time, good luck. You will learn that I am right in real time. It may not be the exact same reaction as in the West when you swear in English, but again, that's an issue of reaction to vulgarity, not whether or not something is vulgar itself. And this links into the fact that some people say that, okay, but Japanese doesn't have many swear words. Well, again, that's not fair. I guess if you look in terms of like nouns, words, maybe not. But Japanese has, I guess you'd call them swear conjugations, swearigations, swear pronouns. We don't have those. Does that mean that we don't have a lot of swearing and Japanese does? No, again, if you want to understand the fundamental concept we're talking about here, which is being vulgar, you have to go beyond a monolingual perspective, which means going beyond the definitions and approaches that you have decided on based on the one language that you speak, or even the few languages you speak that all happen to be in the same language family. So with that said, let's move into some understanding of Japanese vulgarity. Japanese has a huge number of words for insulting people. I have a whole dictionary of them. It's kind of a fun read sometimes. But an insult I don't think is the same thing as vulgar. You've probably heard words like baka, aho, etc. I wouldn't call those vulgarities. And I do agree with the general vibe that the number of Japanese vulgarities that are just like simple nouns is, not a huge amount compared to some other languages. Two of the most straightforward that you'll see is just kuso, which is like shit, and chikusho, which is similar to bastard, but could be damn it. In some cases, fuck, it all depends on like your tone of voice. If people say that kuso is not the same as shit, I actually would agree with that too, because while there are cases where it's one-to-one, there are some places where it's like a perfect translation, in terms of how it's used, the vibe it gives, the level of offensiveness. You will see kuso just like randomly appearing in Japanese words that aren't offensive at all. Like as far as I'm aware, there is no more polite version of like hanakuso, which is snot, boogers, like mimikuso, earwax. You can say that to the doctor and they would not be offended. But if you're just like, kuso, then they might think you're a bit, vulgar. It's not the term you should use to refer to like a stool sample, but no shit, that's fine. That's the word that's there. Chikusho literally means beast, but is often used just like as a vulgar exclamation of frustration, irritation, etc. But it's not as varied as kuso, because kuso can also be used as an emphasizer, in which case it kind of works like fucking in English, like kuso moshiroi, kuso tanoshi, fucking interesting, fucking fun. It also attaches as a prefix or suffix to words, like gaki is kind of like brat, so like kusogaki is like a shit-nosed little brat. And these kind of suffixes, prefixes also happen quite a bit. Attaching me to the end of a number of words can make them quite vulgar and pointed insults. But calling someone baka or bakamono on its own, I would not say is like vulgar, but like bakamonome, which some dictionaries hilariously translate as like an unwelcome person, an unwelcome entity, can definitely up that to a level where it becomes not just insulting, but also crude. Yaro attached to the end of something does kind of the same effect. So like Nezumi Yaro is pretty much, in my opinion, a one-to-one with like rat bastard. There will be some of these that won't vibe for you, like takoyaro, like octopus bastard, I guess, is an insult in Japanese. And again, you shouldn't be like, well, I called someone a motherfucker, but Japanese people just call them an octopus bastard, so clearly my language is stronger. No, like, again, it's all about customs, right? It's all about history. Something like takoyaro has a history of being used as an intense insult, so it doesn't matter if it's kind of silly literally. What matters is the intent and the history. Like, they could say the same thing about our languages. Like, I don't have an edible complex, so that last insult doesn't affect me. Or like, you're a bastard. It's like, well, no, I'm not. And also, even if I was, so what? Looking down on people who can't directly trace their lineage seems like pretty unwoke, right? Swearing reflects badly on you, not me. We're not supposed to analyze the actual meaning of these things. We just say these things because we know they're supposed to offend people and insult them and attack them. So yeah, you're an octopus. How about that? What now? Katekoi. Another source of vulgarity, though, is actually dropping prefixes and suffixes that are supposed to be there. A big one is O. There's that kind of that beautification O that like isn't part of a word. And on some words it's optional, but in others you have to say it. And if that's dropped, it can very much have a kind of vulgar, rough image. If in Japanese media, if they want to show like an older man, a boss, a husband, or whatever, it's kind of a gruff piece of shit. they'll drop the O from when they say like ocha, so they're like cha, cha. And like that is perceived as vulgar, as bad language use. Like, where's the damn tea would be like a fine translation in some contexts. And on that note, while Japanese people do use like fucku sometimes, it's usually with a bit of self-awareness. Although it has seen like in some certain subcultures, like in rap lyrics, in Japanese rap lyrics, you will see it used in like a kuso majime way, I guess. Bichi has been adopted by Japanese people and is somewhat productive. It doesn't have exactly the same meaning, but you will see it in a way that is used to describe people negatively. In some cases, it translates kind of more like whore. It is out there. It is absolutely a swear word that has been borrowed from English that is used as a swear word in Japanese. On that note, referring to women as like onna or men as otoko can, in some context, be quite vulgar. There's a lot of insults that denigrate women specifically that use onna instead of like onna no hito or josei. And of course, Japanese has a number of vulgar terms for body parts, just like every language I'm familiar with. So like cunt and manko are pretty much as offensive, although you can't, as far as I'm aware, you can't like refer to somebody with this term in Japanese like you can call somebody a cunt in English. And there are derived terms like this, like yariman, which combines manko with, of course, yaru, to do, but also to have sex with, to denigrate a woman for their sexual behavior. Outside of all this, though, of course, you have second-person pronouns, which is the real big one. Calling somebody by a disrespectful second-person pronoun in Japanese can be quite insulting. If you're doing it with friends, it can be a bit of, bonding, just like Australians and the C word, as I mentioned earlier. But things like kisama, omae, teme, any of these can be a very, very pointed fuck you. Only all kept up in the U. And again, talking about how things change, if you look at the etymology of some of these words, they were not offensive at all. Kisama is literally like honorable lord. Omae has the O beautification prefix, which is normally polite. It's, the honorable person in front of me. But through use, through change, through sarcasm, etc., these have become terms that you do not want to call people unless you are looking for a fight. A lot of Japanese vulgarity, though, is then based in pronunciation and conjugation. A grammar point that I actually particularly love in Japanese, I think it's really, really fun. I don't use it, but I like it, is the yagaru or te yagaru form, which expresses contempt towards the doer of an action. So if you go out and use the content of this video in like a really inappropriate way, I would criticize you by saying like, "Watashi ga oshieta kitanai kotoba o tsukai yagatte." And that is like looking like, how dare you? Like, don't fucking use the words I taught you in inappropriate situations. Similarly, any kind of conjugation of an adjective or something that ends in the e sound, anything that ends in like nai, into an e sound, is generally considered to be a quite crude and bad word way of speaking. So like instead of saying kitanai, saying kitane, omoshire, tsumanne, kue, yaritaku ne. In some contexts, these may be but these are never going to be looked on favorably, and in other cases, they definitely be seen as vulgar. On top of all this, then, you have sentence final particles, and these are the hardest to talk about because this is all contextual. Again, all swearing is contextual, all vulgarity is contextual, but these are especially so because all sentence final particles have multiple implications, and for the ones I'm going to talk about, a lot of them are not vulgar. They can be kind of rough or like, a bit kind of edgy or youthful, but they don't necessarily imply anything that would be considered like, bad language use. But change the context just a bit, and then there you are. So zo and ze, especially as sentence final particles, can be very, very aggressive. There's a really interesting article on like Japanese shock advertising that talks about the use of zo and ze. And while it mentions that this is something that you didn't used to see in Japan, and so these advertisements are clearly trying to like shock people through this vulgarity, they also note advertisements like this, which they instead interpret as like youthful energy. So again, would a zo by any other context smell as vulgar? I don't know. If I were to phrase that as like wakane zo, nobody would probably think I'm speaking too politely or compliment my Japanese as utsukushi. Similarly, the sentence final ka in the plain form can be incredibly insulting. I've talked about it before, but like shiruka, which is literally just like, who knows, is often, and I think should be translated as like, who gives a fuck, or I don't give a shit. How the fuck should I know? Anything like that is very much implied for that. Again, in other contexts, a plain form ka at the end of a question can just be like kind of a bit gruff. Like you might see a dad be like, iku ka, like, shall we go? Also, I'm a bit, casual and gruff. I have a beard, but I'm still a lovable dad. But in other contexts, a plain form ka can be extremely, extremely haughty and vulgar. If you want like a good example of lots of examples of vulgarity, the show Debunking is like especially the women characters in the show, these two and the grandma lady, their mouths are filthy. Again, showing kind of a difference in response. My wife's a big fan of this show, but she constantly complains about how everybody talks so vulgarly, but she doesn't say it should be banned or like blocked from TV. But these characters do talk in a way that generally would be considered to be quite vulgar, so you can learn a lot of terms from watching that. And again, I think knowing this kind of stuff is super important. There's more that I haven't covered in this video, but like I think having an understanding of vulgarity, even if it's just to know when people are insulting you and being and threatening you with vulgar language so you can get out of that situation is important. I don't think you can become a fluent English speaker if you don't know how to use fuck, because it's fucking everywhere in our media. But that doesn't mean you should kind of use these. But rather than just kind of list terms for another few minutes or so, let's actually break down some of the vulgarity that we'll see in a pretty infamous anime scene which uses a huge amount of bad Japanese, and this is reflected in the English translations. I'll show you clips and then I'll talk about what happened. So in this initial phrase, you have some insults, but I wouldn't say that anything's vulgar except for, again, omaetachi is something that could be in some contexts insulting, considered bad language. Here it's kind of translated as lowlife, which I think is fine, but you could easily put bastards there and I don't think anyone would complain. So here you have kiteria, which is like, again, one of those kind of vulgarish conjugations. It's a way of saying things that doesn't match the standard, and so it's kind of looked down upon. On top of that, the woman is called a mesubuta, which is literally like a sow. While Japanese doesn't have blasphemy terms, there are a lot of like references to referring to people as animals, which again, that's where bitch comes from, right? Which are considered to be very, very vulgar insults. And then it ends with the yagaru form, which I mentioned earlier, which is used to insult the listener's actions. And indeed, the verb for speak there, nukasu, is considered vulgar as well. So nukasu plus yagaru is a vulgar word for speak, and then making that more vulgar by showing contempt for the person's speaking. In this one, you have the use of teme again to refer to the person, which is insulting. And then within a bunch of like, just kind of unpleasant framing, kusata meaning rotten is often kind of a not nice thing to say. Tare nagashi means like incontinence, and there's a lot of poop-related vulgarity in Japanese. But you end with the command form in yagare. And generally speaking, the command form, when used by somebody who is not like able to command you, a military commander is very different from just like someone on the street, is considered to be quite offensive, again, contextually. The boy is also referred to as a kozo, which literally can be a priest, but again, this is a term that can mean like brat, etc. Whether or not that's an insult or a vulgarity, we can debate, but it combines to have that vulgar effect with everything else that's going on. It's not to that man, it's to that, noun that means person I don't respect. Here, the subtitles don't actually have a swear word, just italicizing you, but again, kisama would be considered a vulgarity in many contexts. Here you have do, which is like an emphasizer, but do hentai is extremely perverted, right? Which can be insulting, wouldn't call it vulgar, but you do have onna again written at the end there. Calling somebody this instead of, josei onna no hito, there's a reason they're saying do hentai onna instead of those other terms, and that is again to emphasize the vulgarity here. The less respect you show for somebody, especially neutral terms that you're supposed to put there. Like again, onna no hito is not like super respectful, but by removing the base level of respect that fits like normal conversation between two people that aren't trying to insult each other, you end up in a place where interpretation of vulgarity becomes extremely possible. Here, there's nothing I would say is vulgar, but it does sound very, very haughty. Warawa and kegawarashi are both kind of old-fashioned-y, samurai-y vibes, so I think the translation did a pretty good job of translating that. This part, though, it is what it is. There's a lot here. You have do again, but do kusare, so again, like rotten, extremely rotten. Again, I wouldn't say the do is inherently vulgar, but in this case, combined with that kind of insult, it brings it to that level. Gero buta, gero is kind of a vulgar term for vomit, and so calling someone a vomit pig, we're moving to a place where just like an insult definitely becomes a vulgarity, a vulgar insult. And then bichi is used, which I mentioned earlier, and calling them a musume, which again is just an attempt to denigrate them. Maybe you could argue that musume is not a swear word. I think that'd be fine. But in this context, it all works with everything else to make the sentence, the overall utterance, extremely vulgar. So there you go. These are some vulgarities that exist in Japanese. Japanese does have swearing. It's different from how swearing works in English sometimes. But if we want to understand vulgarity, if we want to understand swearing as an actual concept that exists throughout all human society, we need to accept that different languages, which are built in different ways and come from different cultures with different experiences and different histories, will operate in different ways when trying to ultimately get to the same effect. You may see some of the terms I talked about today on like children's TV in Japan, but you will not see their equivalents in TV aimed at children in America. But that's not because they are not insulting, it's because of different cultural responses to vulgarity. And let me tell you, the people using these vulgarities will probably be the villains, not the heroes. Anpanman doesn't talk like this. But Baikinman might get a Takuyaro out there somewhere. Doraemon is famously incredibly foul-mouthed, to the extent that they call him Dorakasu, with kasu itself being a potential vulgar insult. But again, times change, and in modern Doraemon TV shows, they censor some of the things that he used to say in the comic. So all in all, I do hope this video was helpful in contextualizing things. I do hope this video answers some of the questions people have. And I do hope this video helps you recognize and understand some of the Japanese vulgarity out there, because a lot of people want to engage with Japanese media, and just like English media, you do need to know some of this to do that. But again, this is not a to use. Indeed, sometimes the reason we learn about something is to learn why we shouldn't use it, and to learn why we need to take it seriously. And that overall is what I really, really hope I did with this video. Because I don't want to be this reason that a bunch of like N4, N5 people suddenly start using swear words in the middle of Japan. That would be awful. It would be nice if people go, okay, no, this actually is something that I need to take seriously, and while I can maybe use it with my friends, that's okay. While I can maybe see it in anime, which is fictional language, South Park kids are not an accurate representation of the average elementary school student. It is something that can absolutely offend people in Japan, or perhaps even more likely, have people look down on me and impact my ability to successfully interact with these people in the future, because they will see me as a kind of person who uses this sort of language. But yeah, and that's it. Thanks for watching this fucking video, you goddamn octopus bastards.